There is a professor at Hogwarts whose story is as complex as it is fascinating. A man who collected the most talented wizards of his time like living trophies, who kept one of the darkest secrets of magic ever revealed, and who, despite his apparently cowardly nature, proved capable of extraordinary courage when it mattered most. His name is Horace Slughorn, and today you will discover every detail of the trajectory of this wizard who lived between light and shadows, between ambition and redemption, witnessing and influencing some of the most crucial moments in the history of the magical world. Prepare yourself, because this is a story that goes far beyond appearances, revealing layers of complexity that make Slughorn one of the most interesting and human characters in the entire magical universe. Before we begin this deep journey through the life of Horace Slughorn, I need your support to continue bringing quality content like this. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button right now. Each subscription makes all the difference and motivates me to research and create increasingly better videos about the universe we all love. And tell me here in the comments, from which city are you watching this video? I love knowing where the fans who share this passion with me come from. Now yes, let's dive headfirst into the complete story of Horace Slughorn. Horace Slughorn was born on the 19th of April, 1882, in the full Victorian era of the British wizarding world. From a very young age, Slughorn demonstrated characteristics that would accompany him throughout his life. A peculiar mixture of ambition, sociability, genuine talent for magic, and an almost infallible instinct for identifying and associating with people he believed would become important in the future. His family had reasonable possessions, which provided him with a comfortable childhood, but not extraordinarily wealthy. This created in him a desire to be close to the true elite of the magical world, not necessarily for power itself, but for the prestige, comfort, and privileges that these connections could bring. When Horace arrived at Hogwarts for the first time, around 1893, he was 11 years old and was about to embark on a journey that would define his entire existence. During the sorting ceremony, the sorting hat did not hesitate for very long before shouting, "Slytherin!" The House of Serpents was the perfect place for someone with Slughorn's natural ambition and cunning. But unlike many Slytherins who used these characteristics for dark purposes or pure domination, Horace channeled his ambition in a different way. Through the creation of networks of influence, calculated generosity, and the construction of a legacy based on personal connections. During his years as a student at Hogwarts, Slughorn was not just a brilliant student, he was exceptional in potions from the first year. His mind had a natural aptitude for understanding the complexities of this sophisticated magical art. He instinctively understood how different ingredients interacted, how subtle variations in technique could completely alter the outcome of a potion, and how the theory behind potion preparation connected with other branches of magic. At 15, Slughorn was already experimenting with variations on traditional recipes, noting improvements and tricks in his own copies of textbooks. This passion for potions would never abandon him. But Horace was not just a dedicated student. He was extraordinarily social, charming when he wanted to be, and possessed an impressive memory for names, faces, and personal details about the people around him. Even at Hogwarts, he began to form what would later become his trademark: small groups of talented students whom he cultivated, supported, and kept close. They were not deep friendships in the traditional sense. Slughorn rarely allowed anyone to know his true self, but they were valuable connections that he nurtured carefully. After graduating from Hogwarts around 1900, Slughorn could have followed many paths. With his talent in potions, he could have become an independent potions master, could have worked at the Ministry of Magic, or even dedicated himself to research. However, Horace made a choice that surprised some. He decided to return to Hogwarts as a professor. The decision was not for lack of ambition or out of true love for teaching in the altruistic sense. Slughorn realized something that many did not. Hogwarts was a meeting point for all the important wizarding families in Great Britain. All the future leaders of the magical world passed through those corridors. As a professor, especially as head of Slytherin and Potions Professor, Slughorn would have direct access to the most talented and influential young people during their most formative years. Horace became Potions Professor at Hogwarts around 1920, when he was approximately 38 years old. He quickly established himself not just as a competent professor, but as one of the most talented potions masters in the wizarding world. His classes were challenging but fair, and he had a gift for identifying students with true talent. More significantly, Slughorn officially created what he called the Slug Club, a select group of students whom he invited to special meetings, dinners, and social events. The criterion for being invited was not simply having good grades. Slughorn looked for those who showed signs of future success, exceptional talent, important family connections, or that indefinable quality that suggested they would do something notable in their lives. These Slug Club meetings were legendary at Hogwarts. Slughorn invited not only his current favorite students, but also former students who had become important people. Slughorn was always at the center, the indispensable intermediary, the one who knew everyone and could make valuable introductions. He collected talented people in the same way others collected stamps or works of art, and there was genuine pleasure in it for him, pleasure in discovering raw talent and seeing it flourish. During the decades of 1920 and 1930, Slughorn consolidated his position at Hogwarts. He was head of Slytherin House and had transformed the Serpent's Common Room into his personal domain. Despite being a Slytherin, Slughorn was not intolerant toward Muggleborns, at least not in the same way as many of his housemates. For Horace, talent superseded lineage. If a Muggleborn demonstrated exceptional ability, Slughorn was equally impressed and equally interested in cultivating that talent. This attitude was unusual among Slytherins of the time, and would become even more significant in the years to come. It was in 1938 that an 11-year-old boy arrived at Hogwarts and would forever change the course of Horace Slughorn's life. His name was Tom Marvolo Riddle, and he was sorted into Slytherin. From the first moment Slughorn saw Riddle in his class, he was completely fascinated. Tom Riddle was not just talented, he was extraordinary. His understanding of potions was instinctive and profound. His thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and he possessed a natural charisma that drew others to him. Riddle was polite, charming when necessary, and demonstrated exactly the kind of ambition that Slughorn admired. Horace quickly made Tom Riddle one of the most favored members of his Slug Club. He saw in the boy unlimited potential, perhaps the most brilliant student he had ever taught. Riddle, in turn, recognized Slughorn as a useful tool. The professor had access to knowledge, to rare books in the Hogwarts library, and was always willing to share information with his favorites. During Riddle's first years at Hogwarts, Slughorn genuinely believed he was mentoring someone who would be the greatest wizard of his generation, possibly a future minister of magic or an internationally renowned magical innovator. It was during this period that one of the most significant and terrible conversations of Slughorn's life occurred, a conversation that would haunt him for decades. Tom Riddle was approximately 15 or 16 years old when he sought out Slughorn after a class. The exact moment is not clear, but it happened around 1943 or 1944. Riddle, with his characteristic manipulation skills, had carefully prepared the ground. He chose a moment when Slughorn was in a good mood, possibly after a particularly satisfying Slug Club dinner. Riddle began by asking apparently academic questions about advanced magic, about the limits of what was magically possible. Then, With the same naturalness with which someone would ask about a potion recipe, Tom Riddle asked Slughorn about Horcruxes. The initial question was casual, as if he had simply encountered the term in some obscure book and was curious. Slughorn was visibly uncomfortable. Horcruxes were the kind of dark magic that responsible professors should not talk about, especially not with students. But Riddle was persuasive. He always was. He argued that he was merely seeking academic knowledge, that understanding even the darkest magic was important for a truly educated wizard. He flattered Slughorn, suggesting that only a professor with Horace's knowledge and confidence could discuss such matters appropriately. Slughorn, weakened by the flattery, by the wine he had drunk at dinner, and by his own vanity, gave in. He explained what a Horcrux was, an object in which a wizard or witch hides a fragment of their soul to achieve immortality. The creation process involved committing murder, the most evil act possible, which tore the soul, allowing the wizard to separate a piece of it and seal it in an object. But then, Riddle asked the question that would transform this conversation from merely inappropriate to truly catastrophic. He asked if it was possible to create more than one Horcrux, if someone could divide their soul into multiple fragments for greater security. Slughorn, in that terrible moment, responded that theoretically yes, it was possible, although it had never been done according to his knowledge. 7, he mentioned, would be the most magically powerful number. Tom Riddle absorbed this information with that intense look that Slughorn had interpreted as intellectual thirst, but which was actually something much more sinister. The conversation ended shortly after, and Slughorn, as soon as he was alone, felt a wave of horror and remorse for what he had done. He had given the most dangerous student he had ever known the exact information he needed to embark on an unprecedented path of darkness. In the following years, Slughorn observed Tom Riddle with growing unease. The boy graduated in 1945 as head boy and the best student of his generation, but there was something about him that deeply disturbed Horace. After graduation, Riddle asked Armando Dippet, then headmaster of Hogwarts, to be defense against the dark arts professor. The request was denied due to his youth. Riddle then got a job at Borgin and Burke's, a dark artifacts shop in Diagon Alley, where he used his position to acquire and study powerful and dark magical objects. Horace Slughorn continued his life at Hogwarts during the decades of 1940 and 1950, teaching successive generations of students and continuing with his Slug Club. But the memory of that conversation with Tom Riddle remained with him, a stain on his conscience that he desperately tried to forget or minimize. When rumors began to circulate about a dark wizard calling himself Lord Voldemort, Slughorn felt a chill of recognition, although he did not want to admit the connection. The First Wizarding War began around 1970, and Hogwarts, although safer than the outside world, was not immune to the effects of the conflict. Slughorn saw many of his former students take sides, some joining Voldemort's Death Eaters, others fighting against him. The professor was aging now, nearly 90 years old, but still maintained his position at Hogwarts. During this dark period, Slughorn became even more cautious. He avoided discussing politics openly, did not take sides explicitly, and focused on his function as a professor. It was during this First Wizarding War that Slughorn had some of the most notable students pass through his classes. Lily Evans, a muggle born with extraordinary talent for potions, became one of his absolute favorites. Slughorn was ecstatic about her ability, frequently commenting that he had never seen anyone with such natural aptitude, except perhaps Tom Riddle, although he rarely mentioned that name now. Lily was everything Slughorn admired: talented, ambitious in a positive way, charming, and with a bright future ahead. He included her in his Slug Club and predicted great things for her. Slughorn also taught Severus Snape, a half-blood Slytherin, who demonstrated prodigious talent for potions that rivaled Lily Evans. Snape was harder to read than Lily, darker and more reserved, but Slughorn recognized genius when he saw it. Both Lily and Snape were the kind of student that made Horace's work worthwhile. He did not know at that time how the lives of these two young people would intertwine with the fate of the wizarding world, nor how his own past action had contributed to the tragedy that awaited them. When Lily Evans married James Potter and had a son, Harry, Slughorn was delighted. Another Potter, another generation of a family he had always cultivated. But then came the terrible night of October 31st, 1981. Lord Voldemort attacked the Potter family in Godric's Hollow. James and Lily were murdered, but something extraordinary happened. Voldemort himself was destroyed, apparently killed by Lily's love protection when he tried to kill baby Harry. For Slughorn, the news was devastating and simultaneously terrifying. Lily Evans, one of his favorite students of all time, was dead, murdered by the monster he had helped create. Because Horace had no more illusions now. He knew that Tom Riddle and Lord Voldemort were the same person, and he knew that the information he had provided decades ago about Horcruxes was part of what had made Voldemort practically immortal and so difficult to destroy. The weight of that guilt was overwhelming. Slughorn had kept that memory secret for decades, never telling anyone about that fateful conversation. Now, with Lily dead and Voldemort apparently destroyed but not dead, the memory was an even heavier burden. But Voldemort was apparently gone, and the wizarding world entered a period of peace. Slughorn continued teaching at Hogwarts during the 80s and early 90s. He was aging, now well over 100 years old, but still maintained his characteristic vivacity and his love for comfort and good food. He saw Severus Snape return to Hogwarts as potions professor, which created an interesting situation. Snape was arguably more talented in potions than Slughorn had ever been, but Snape assumed the position of defense against the dark arts professor, leaving potions with Slughorn. Actually, this sequence is incorrect. Severus Snape became potions professor when Slughorn was still at Hogwarts, but by Harry Potter's time, Slughorn had retired. Around 1996, Horace Slughorn made the decision to retire from Hogwarts. He was 114 years old and had taught at Hogwarts for over 75 years. But his retirement was not simply a matter of age. Slughorn was increasingly nervous about signs that Lord Voldemort might return. There were rumors, whispers, small incidents that suggested the Death Eaters were becoming active again. For someone like Horace Slughorn, always cautious, always thinking about his own safety and comfort, the prospect of Voldemort's return was terrifying. He knew secrets that could be valuable to both sides of the impending conflict. He knew that both Dumbledore and Voldemort might want to speak with him, and Horace did not want to speak with either of them. So he did what he always did when things got difficult. He ran away. Slughorn left Hogwarts and effectively went into hiding. Horace Slughorn's life in the following years was marked by constant paranoia and continuous movement. He knew there was information in his mind that Lord Voldemort would probably like to have, although he was not sure if Voldemort knew that he knew about the Horcruxes. But Slughorn was not willing to take risks. He developed an ingenious technique for hiding, transforming himself into an armchair whenever he felt danger approaching. Using his skill in magic, he could disguise himself perfectly as a piece of furniture, remaining motionless for hours if necessary. It was a cowardly strategy, perhaps, but effective. Slughorn moved from house to house, sometimes staying in properties of former students who were traveling, sometimes simply occupying temporarily empty Muggle houses. He used protection spells, kept himself updated on Wizarding World news through newspapers and occasional contacts, and lived in a state of semi-seclusion. It was not the comfortable life he preferred, but it was better than the alternative. Being found by Death Eaters or being pressured by Dumbledore to reveal secrets he had kept for over 50 years. In June 1995, Lord Voldemort returned to full power. The news sent shockwaves through the wizarding world, although the Ministry of Magic tried to deny and suppress the truth. For Slughorn, this confirmed his worst fears. He intensified his precautions, moving more frequently, trusting less and less in his old connections for fear they might be compromised. Voldemort was rebuilding his army of Death Eaters, and Slughorn constantly feared he might be a target, whether for forced recruitment, for information extraction, or simply for revenge for hiding. It was during this period that Albus Dumbledore began actively searching for Horace Slughorn. Dumbledore had reached a disturbing conclusion about how Voldemort had achieved his apparent immortality. He had created Horcruxes, multiple Horcruxes. But Dumbledore needed confirmation. He needed to know exactly how many Horcruxes Voldemort had created, and he suspected that Horace Slughorn might have this information. Dumbledore vaguely remembered something strange between Slughorn and young Tom Riddle, a change in Horace's behavior after a private conversation that had happened decades ago. In the summer of 1996, Dumbledore finally located Slughorn. Horace was hiding in a muggle house in the village of Budleigh Babbitton. The house belonged to a family that was on vacation. When Dumbledore and Harry Potter apparated outside the house that night, Slughorn sensed them coming. Using reflexes developed by a year of constant hiding, he quickly transformed himself into an armchair in the middle of the living room. When Dumbledore and Harry entered the house, they found what appeared to be a scene of devastation. Overturned furniture, bloodstains, dragon blood actually, strategically spread by Slughorn to suggest violence, and signs of struggle. But Dumbledore was too experienced to be fooled. He had known Slughorn for many decades and recognized the signs of a staged escape. With a small smile, Dumbledore began to examine the room, commenting casually on various details. Then he approached the armchair and, with his wand, poked the upholstered arm. The armchair gave a small jump. Slughorn had been discovered. Realizing that maintaining the farce was useless, Horace Slughorn transformed back into his human form, looking both relieved and irritated at having been found. What followed was a fascinating conversation between two people who had known each other for a long time. Dumbledore did not immediately press Slughorn about the true reason for his visit. Instead, he introduced Harry Potter, and Slughorn was immediately intrigued. This was the boy who had survived, the son of Lily Evans, one of his favorite students. Dumbledore, knowing Slughorn so well, used Harry as bait. He mentioned Harry's talent, his notable achievements during his 5 years at Hogwarts, and made it clear that Harry would be a student at Hogwarts the following year. Then Dumbledore made his main move. He offered Slughorn the chance to return to Hogwarts as potions professor. Severus Snape, Dumbledore explained, would finally assume the position of defense against the dark arts professor. The potions professor position was vacant, and who better to fill it than the legendary Horace Slughorn? Dumbledore appealed to Slughorn's vanity, to his nostalgia for the glory days at Hogwarts, and especially to his collection of talented students. Harry Potter, Dumbledore argued, would be his student. The chance to add the boy who lived to his collection was almost irresistible. But Slughorn was cautious. Would Hogwarts be safe with Voldemort at large? Dumbledore assured him that Hogwarts was probably the safest place in the wizarding world, with elaborate protections and himself present. Moreover, Dumbledore pointed out, Slughorn would spend the rest of his life running and hiding. Was that really how he wanted to live his final years? Slughorn hesitated, clearly tempted, but still resistant. He asked for time to think, and Dumbledore graciously agreed. They departed, but Dumbledore knew he had planted the seed. In the following weeks, Horace Slughorn struggled with his decision. Dumbledore's offer was tempting, very tempting. The safety of Hogwarts, the return to comfort and prestige, the opportunity to teach again, and yes, to add Harry Potter to his collection. All of this pulled him in one direction. But there was fear. The fear that Dumbledore wanted more from him than just teaching potions. Slughorn was not a fool. He suspected that Dumbledore was after that memory, that terrible secret he had kept for over 50 years. In the end, Slughorn's desire for normalcy, comfort and relevance won over his fear. He accepted Dumbledore's offer and returned to Hogwarts in September 1996, at the beginning of Harry Potter's 6th year. His arrival caused quite a stir. Many of the older professors remembered him, and even the younger ones knew his reputation. Slughorn immediately settled into his old position, although much had changed at Hogwarts since his departure. Horace quickly resumed his old ways. He restarted the Slug Club, beginning to identify and cultivate the most talented and promising students. Harry Potter obviously was at the top of his list, not just for who he was, but because Slughorn discovered to his delight that Harry had genuine talent for potions when properly taught. Hermione Granger, with her brilliant mind and dedication, also became an immediate favorite. He even tried to cultivate Draco Malfoy, despite the family's obvious dark associations, because Slughorn always had difficulty resisting connections with powerful families. But Dumbledore had not brought Slughorn back just to teach potions. He needed that memory. However, Dumbledore was patient and strategic. He did not confront Slughorn directly at first. Instead, he instructed Harry Potter to obtain the memory. Harry, initially confused about why this was so important, began trying to approach Slughorn and subtly ask for the memory. Slughorn, however, immediately recognized what was happening. Whenever Harry mentioned Tom Riddle or insinuated questions about Voldemort, Slughorn closed up, became evasive, and changed the subject. Throughout the school year of 1996 to 1997, Slughorn experienced a mixture of pleasure and anxiety. On one hand, he was back in the environment he loved, surrounded by talented students, enjoying good meals, rebuilding his connections. He organized his Slug Club dinners with great enthusiasm, invited old friends and successful former students, and generally resumed the lifestyle he had enjoyed for decades. On the other hand, he felt constant pressure about that memory. Dumbledore occasionally made subtle comments. Harry kept trying, and Slughorn knew he would eventually have to face his past. The memory that everyone wanted was something Slughorn had done something extraordinary to hide. He had modified the memory magically, altering crucial details so that if someone saw it, they would not get the real information. It was a form of reverse legitimacy, protecting thoughts through alteration instead of complete occlusion. But the real memory remained somewhere deep in his mind. The shame and guilt he felt about that conversation with Tom Riddle had never really disappeared. A significant event occurred during a potions class when Harry found an old textbook that had belonged to the Half-Blood Prince. This book, which had actually been Severus Snape's during his student days, contained notes and improvements on potion recipes that were brilliant. Harry, using the book's instructions, suddenly became the best potion student in the class, even surpassing Hermione Granger. Slughorn was absolutely delighted, believing Harry had inherited Lily Evans' talent. He did not know that Harry was simply following someone else's instructions. The situation reached a critical point after the death of Albus Dumbledore in June 1997. Dumbledore was killed by Severus Snape at the top of Hogwarts' astronomy tower, an event that shocked the entire wizarding world. For Slughorn, Dumbledore's death was devastating for multiple reasons. Dumbledore had been a constant figure in his life for nearly a century. They had not always been close, and Slughorn knew that Dumbledore judged him for his weaknesses, but there was mutual respect and shared history. Moreover, with Dumbledore dead, Slughorn felt much less safe at Hogwarts. It was on the night of Dumbledore's funeral that Harry Potter finally obtained Slughorn's true memory. After the funeral, Harry found Slughorn alone and clearly emotionally shaken. Slughorn was visibly distressed, drinking heavily, something he did when particularly disturbed. Harry, demonstrating a surprising understanding of Slughorn's psychology, appealed not to his reason, but to his conscience. He spoke about his mother, Lily, about how Slughorn had spoken of her so fondly. He suggested that Lily would have wanted Slughorn to do the right thing, to help defeat Voldemort the only way he could, by providing the information Dumbledore had needed. Slughorn, with tears in his eyes, finally gave in. He extracted the true memory, not the modified version, but the real and complete recollection of that terrible conversation with Tom Riddle decades ago. He handed the memory to Harry in a small vial, and in doing so seemed to age even more, as if an immense weight had been lifted but left behind only exhaustion. The memory confirmed what Dumbledore had suspected. Voldemort had planned to create 6 Horcruxes, dividing his soul into 7 parts, with Voldemort himself being the 7th part. This information was crucial to Voldemort's eventual defeat. Without knowing the number of Horcruxes, the task of destroying them all would have been nearly impossible. By providing this memory, Slughorn finally, after more than half a century, did something to counteract the terrible mistake he had made in giving that information to Tom Riddle in the first place. It did not erase his guilt, nothing could do that, but it was a step toward redemption. After Dumbledore's funeral, Hogwarts changed dramatically. Severus Snape became headmaster during the school year of 1997 to 1998, under the control of the Ministry of Magic, which was now in Voldemort's hands. The Carrows, brutal Death Eaters, were installed as professors. It was a dark time for Hogwarts, with cruel punishments, dark propaganda, and fear permeating the corridors. For someone like Horace Slughorn, it was an impossible situation. Slughorn was not brave in the traditional sense, but he was also not evil. He did not agree with the Carrows' policies, with the torture of students, with the open prejudice against Muggleborns. But he was also not like McGonagall, Flitwick, or Sprout, who actively resisted. Slughorn did the minimum necessary to survive, teaching his classes, keeping his head down, avoiding both supporting the darkness and openly resisting it. It was characteristically Slughorn, doing enough not to be seen as an enemy, but not enough to be considered a true ally of either side. During that terrible year, Slughorn must have frequently thought about running away again, about abandoning Hogwarts and returning to hiding, but something kept him there. Perhaps it was the memory of how he had felt spending a year running. Perhaps it was a nascent feeling that there were certain lines even he would not cross. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that, at 115 years old, he was too old and tired to start running again. Then came the night of May 2nd, 1998, the Battle of Hogwarts. Voldemort attacked Hogwarts with his full army of Death Eaters, giants, acromantulas, and other dark creatures. The Order of the Phoenix, members of Dumbledore's army, professors and students united to defend the castle. It was the final confrontation between the forces of light and darkness. During the first part of the battle, Horace Slughorn remained with most of the younger students who were evacuated. He was not seen among the first defenders of the castle. It was typical of Slughorn. His first reaction to danger had always been self-preservation. But then, something changed. Perhaps it was the sound of the battle, the knowledge that students he had taught were out there fighting and dying. Perhaps it was the memory of Lily Evans, or the guilt of decades about his role in creating Voldemort. Perhaps it was simply the fact that, for the first time in his long life, Horace Slughorn realized there were things more important than his own safety and comfort. Whatever the reason, Horace Slughorn made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He returned to Hogwarts during the battle. More than that, he led a group of reinforcements, including inhabitants of Hogsmeade Village and families of students who had decided to fight. Slughorn arrived at the castle with this group, significantly increasing the number of defenders. His arrival provided a crucial boost at a critical moment of the battle, but Slughorn did not stop there. When Voldemort himself entered the Great Hall for the final confrontation, Horace Slughorn was among those who faced the Dark Lord. Alongside Minerva McGonagall and Kingsley Shacklebolt, Slughorn duelled against Voldemort. There is no way to overstate what this meant for a man who had spent decades avoiding any kind of dangerous confrontation, who had literally hidden from Voldemort for years. Slughorn, in that moment, found a courage that perhaps even he did not know he possessed. The duel against Voldemort was fierce and brief. Voldemort was extraordinarily powerful, capable of fighting 3 of the most talented wizards simultaneously. Slughorn, despite his age and decades away from real combat, proved to be a formidable opponent. His mastery of potions translated into deep knowledge of magic, and he had been a Hogwarts professor for decades. One did not maintain such a position without considerable skill. The 3, McGonagall, Shacklebolt and Slughorn, combined their powers, forcing Voldemort to divide himself among multiple opponents. The duel ended not because they defeated Voldemort directly, but because the battle between Harry Potter and Voldemort reached its conclusion. When Voldemort's killing curse rebounded against him, destroying him finally and completely, the battle ended. Slughorn had survived, had fought, and had been part of the final victory over the Dark Wizard, whose rise he had inadvertently facilitated decades earlier. After the battle, Horace Slughorn remained at Hogwarts. He witnessed the funeral of the fallen, saw the scars left on the castle he so loved, and processed the fact that he had finally, after more than 50 years, helped correct his terrible mistake. Slughorn was not the type of man to become a declared hero. He never sought recognition for his participation in the battle, never boasted about having duelled against Voldemort. But those who were there knew what he had done. Slughorn continued as potions professor at Hogwarts after the war. He was now over 115 years old, an extraordinary age even by wizarding standards, but was still mentally sharp and capable. The wizarding world was rebuilding itself, and Hogwarts was being restored after the damage from the battle. A new generation of students arrived, born during or shortly after the war, and Slughorn was there to teach them. The post-war period was a time of reflection for Horace. He had lived a long and, in many ways, successful life. He had taught thousands of students, many of whom had become notable witches and wizards. He had contributed significantly to the field of potions through his own research and inventions. He had created a network of connections that had benefited countless people over the years. But he also carried the indelible mark of having given Tom Riddle the information that allowed the young man to become the immortal and nearly invincible Lord Voldemort. We do not know exactly when Horace Slughorn finally retired from Hogwarts or when he died. What we know is that he lived well beyond the war, probably continuing to teach for several years. His death, when it finally came, was presumably peaceful, a natural conclusion to an extraordinarily long life. Slughorn was not remembered as one of the great heroes of the war against Voldemort. His contribution was more subtle, but no less significant. The story of Horace Slughorn is a story about human complexity. He was neither hero nor villain. He was a deeply flawed man who loved comfort, prestige, and connections, but who also had genuine appreciation for talent and potential. He made a terrible mistake in providing information about Horcruxes to Tom Riddle, a mistake that haunted the wizarding world for decades. But when he finally had the chance to begin making amends, even if decades late, he took it. And when the crucial moment came, when courage was necessary, Slughorn found it within himself, proving that even the most unlikely among us can rise above our natures when it matters most. Slughorn represented something very human in the magical world of Harry Potter. He was not nobly sacrificial like Dumbledore, nor tragically divided like Snape, nor malignantly ambitious like Voldemort. He was simply a man who wanted to live comfortably, be surrounded by interesting and talented people, and avoid danger whenever possible. These are not particularly lofty aspirations, but they are perfectly understandable. What makes Slughorn interesting is that, despite these very mundane inclinations, he was capable of moral growth, of facing his own flaws, and of doing the right thing when it really mattered. His presence at Hogwarts for so many decades meant that he influenced generations of witches and wizards. Some, like Tom Riddle, he influenced in terrible and unintentional ways. Others, like Lily Evans, he genuinely supported and encouraged. His Slug Club, although founded on somewhat selfish motives, did in fact help many young wizards make valuable connections and launch successful careers. Slughorn believed in meritocracy, at least in his own version of it, where talent mattered more than lineage. For a Slytherin of his generation, this was remarkably progressive. Slughorn's relationship with Harry Potter was particularly significant. Through Harry, Slughorn had a second chance to interact with Lily Evans's son, an opportunity to support someone who represented everything good in the wizarding world. Harry, in turn, was one of the few who managed to see beyond Slughorn's facade, recognizing both his flaws and his potential for good. It was Harry who finally obtained the crucial memory, and it was the memory of Lily invoked by Harry that finally broke Slughorn's resistance. One of the most fascinating questions about Slughorn is why Tom Riddle chose exactly him to ask about Horcruxes. Riddle was extraordinarily intelligent and manipulative. He did not choose Slughorn randomly. He perceived that Slughorn had the knowledge he needed, that Slughorn was vain and susceptible to flattery, and that unlike Dumbledore or other more vigilant professors, Slughorn could be convinced to share information he should have kept guarded. Riddle correctly assessed Slughorn's weaknesses and exploited them perfectly. Slughorn, in turn, allowed his vanity and his affection for the talented Tom Riddle to override his judgment, a mistake that cost countless lives. Adore 18. But we have to ask ourselves, did Slughorn really understand the full implications of what he was saying when he spoke with Riddle? Probably not. He knew the theory of Horcruxes, certainly, and knew it was dark magic of the worst kind. But it is unlikely he imagined that Riddle would actually try to create not one, but 6 Horcruxes. It is unlikely he foresaw the decades of terror that would follow. Slughorn was naive, vain, and imprudent, but he was not malicious. This distinction is important. His crime was one of negligence and vanity, not malign intent. Slughorn's journey from coward in flight to active participant in the Battle of Hogwarts represents one of the most subtle but most satisfying redemption arcs in the Harry Potter series. It was not a dramatic and instantaneous transformation. It was gradual, reluctant, and very human. Slughorn did not wake up one day, decided to be a hero. He was pushed step by step out of his comfort zone, first returning to Hogwarts, then providing the critical memory, and finally taking up arms in the final battle. Each step was difficult for him, each step was against his natural instincts, and it is exactly because of this that his eventual courage means so much. When we think about the professors of Hogwarts, we frequently remember the more dramatic figures, Dumbledore with his wisdom and sacrifice, McGonagall with her fierce courage, Snape with his complex and tragic loyalty. But Slughorn deserves to be remembered too, precisely because he was not extraordinary in the same way. He was ordinary in his weaknesses, and it was his overcoming of these ordinary weaknesses, not of some tragic flaw, but of common cowardice, normal vanity, and mundane selfishness, that makes him such an important and relatable figure. If Slughorn teaches us anything, it is that it is never too late to do the right thing. We are never too old to grow, and that even those who have made terrible mistakes can find redemption if they are willing to face their failures and do what is necessary to correct them. Slughorn lived more than a century before finally taking a real stand against evil, but when he did, it mattered. His memory was crucial to Voldemort's defeat, And his participation in the Battle of Hogwarts, although it did not alone decide the outcome, was part of the collective victory. Horace Slughorn's life spanned some of the most significant periods in 20th century wizarding history. He taught during the rise and fall of Grindelwald's first era, witnessed the emergence and first fall of Voldemort, lived through the Ministry's denial of Voldemort's return, and finally participated in the final battle that determined the fate of the wizarding world. Through all of this, he remained fundamentally himself, a man who loved luxury and comfort, who collected talented people, who avoided conflict when possible. But at the most crucial moment, he found within himself something more, a flame of courage and decency that had been there all along, buried under layers of self-interest, but never completely extinguished. His story reminds us that heroism is not always about being fearless from the beginning. Sometimes it is about finding courage despite fear, about doing the right thing even when every instinct says to run, about recognizing when we have erred and having the strength to try to correct it, even decades later. Horace Slughorn was not a perfect man, far from it, but in the end, when it really mattered, he chose to be on the right side, fight for the right cause, and confront the monster he had, inadvertently, helped create. And that, perhaps, is the truest definition of redemption. Not becoming perfect, but choosing to be better than we were, even when it is terribly late and terribly difficult. So this is the complete story of Horace Slughorn, a professor who lived for more than a century, who taught some of the greatest minds in the wizarding world, who made a terrible mistake that haunted decades, but who finally, when everything was at stake, found the courage to fight for what was right. His life was not perfect, his story is not one of constant heroism, but it is a deeply human story about failure, guilt, fear, and finally, redemption. And perhaps it is exactly this imperfect humanity that makes Horace Slughorn one of the most fascinating and relatable figures in the entire Harry Potter universe. If this story inspired you, touched your heart, or made you reflect on redemption and courage, leave your like, share with other fans of the Harry Potter universe, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Tell me in the comments which moment of Slughorn's story impacted you the most and which character you would like me to explore in the next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and remember, it is never too late to do the right thing. Until next time, and may magic always be with you.